Wash day. Mrs Kyndley lives in a cottage beside Thomas's branch line. She loves to see Thomas puff past her cottage every day. Thomas blows a cheerful whistle every time he passes her. Percy often passes pulling goods trains. He whistles to Mrs Kyndley as well. Toby dings his bell to her whenever he can. The engines know they can always make Mrs Kyndley happy. Mrs Kyndley is a very special friend to all the engines. One day the Fat Controller came to Tidmouth Sheds. He had some bad news. "Thomas has been taken ill," he said, "so I've sent him to the works to be mended." Emily, Percy and Toby were disappointed.
"Poor Thomas," said Emily.
"Emily, you must look after Thomas's passengers until he is better," said the Fat Controller.
"Yes, sir,"
wheezed Emily. "Toby and Percy," the Fat Controller went on, "you two will continue your delivery of trucks on Thomas's branch line."
"Yes, sir," said Toby. "Right away, sir," chuffed Percy.
"Be sure to be on time," said the Fat Controller, and he left. Emily felt sorry for Thomas, but pleased she would be looking after his passengers.
"I better collect my coaches," she smiled. "Mustn't be late." "Say hello to Mrs Kyndley for us," said Percy.
Emily was puzzled. She didn't know who Mrs Kyndley was.
"Who's she asked.
"She lives in a cottage by the side of Thomas's branch line," smiled Toby. "She always waves to us as we puff by." Emily now felt excited to meet Mrs Kyndley. She would be sure to whistle to her as she passed by. When Emily had collected her coaches, she set off to Farquhar station to collect Thomas's passengers. But then a thought struck Emily.
"Do you think Mrs Kyndley will be pleased to see us?"
she asked her driver. "Oh, I'm sure she will," smiled the driver. "She'll be pleased to make a new friend in you." That made Emily feel much better. Soon Emily puffed into Farquhar station where the passengers were waiting. Emily was pleased to see the passengers. She couldn't wait to start her journey. But Emily was looking forward to seeing Mrs Kyndley more.
"I wonder if she will see me," she thought to herself.
Then the guard blew his whistle and Emily set off happily out of the station. Emily raced through the tunnel and then she could see on the other side a cottage with smoke coming out of the chimney.
"There she is! There she is!"
she whistled excitedly. As she puffed out of the tunnel, she whistled to say hello, but then she heard a strange cry coming from the cottage.
"Help! Help! Burst my bumpers!" she cried. "What's happening?"
Her driver stopped her outside the cottage and the driver and fireman could see what had happened. Mrs Kyndley was stuck under a big blanket. Quickly they raced to the cottage and helped remove the blanket off her. "Are you all right?" asked the driver.
"Thank you,"
said Mrs Kyndley.
"I'm okay, but look at my washing line."
Everyone looked and they could see that the washing line had snapped and all the laundry had fallen to the ground.
"That was the last of my string as well," sighed Mrs Kyndley, "and it will take me a long time to wash all of this again." "Oh dear," said Emily. "Is there anything we can do to help?"
"We'll see what we can do," pondered the fireman. The driver and fireman climbed back into Emily's cab. Then they set off again. Emily had to make up for lost time. As they puffed along, Emily kept thinking about Mrs Kyndley's washing line and about how she could help her. But no matter how she tried, nothing came into mind.
"I wish there was something we could do to help,"
she thought. Soon she arrived at Elsbridge station. Harry and Bert were there. They were replacing the old rails with the new rails. Emily pulled into the station.
"Poor Mrs Kyndley," she said. "How can I help her get her washing line fixed?"
Harry and Bert sniggered when they heard this. "Steam engines and washing lines," chuckled Harry. "I never knew steam engines cared about dirty laundry." "Just a sort of job for a steam engine," guffled Bert. "Handling dirty laundry is just a thing to make a steam engine look silly." This made Emily cross. She thought Harry and Bert were being very rude, so she took no notice of what they said. Soon it was time to go. "Off we go, Emily," said the driver, just as the guard's whistle blew. "Let's try and make Thomas proud."
"Yes, sir,"
puffed Emily, and she set off.
"If only there was a way to help Mrs Kyndley," said Emily. "I'd hate to see her struggle on her own."
"We'll find a way," smiled her driver. "Sometimes good ideas can just come out of nowhere." Emily was puzzled. She didn't understand what that meant.
"How can an idea come out of nowhere?" she wondered.
Emily puffed into the next station. Toby was there. He was with Miss Jenny. Miss Jenny was not happy at all. Emily came to a halt at the station.
"Hello, Toby," smiled Emily. "What's wrong?" "There was a mistake with a delivery today," said Toby. "I've had too much weighs and pulls delivered to me," sighed Miss Jenny. "I cannot send it back now." "Why not?" asked Emily. "Because the lorry is gone and I cannot get anyone else to take it back," replied Miss Jenny. "What are we going to do with all the poles and wire?" asked Toby. Emily looked at all the poles and wire on the platform. Then, suddenly, an idea flew into her funnel. "Now I know how I can help Mrs Kyndley," she smiled. Toby was puzzled, and so was Miss Jenny. "What do you mean?" asked Toby. Emily told them all about Mrs Kyndley's washing line and about what had happened. "All the poles and wire would make a brand new washing line," said Emily. Miss Jenny was delighted. "What a clever idea, Emily," she said. "I can't see a problem with that." Toby agreed. He thought it was a good idea too. Soon the poles and wire were loaded onto a flatbed and it was coupled up to the back of the coaches. A works coach was coupled behind the flatbed. The workmen were going to put up the washing line. Emily was very pleased with her plan. When all the passengers were on board the train, Emily set off again to Mrs Kyndley's cottage. Toby followed on behind. It was a long way back, but Emily knew that delivering passengers was important too. At last they arrived back at the cottage and Emily came to a stop. "Peep, peep," whistled Emily to Mrs Kyndley. "I've got a surprise for you." Mrs Kyndley was confused. The flatbed and coach were uncoupled and Emily set off once more for the station. Toby stayed behind to help the workmen. Emily raced into the station feeling very pleased with herself. She drew to a halt. "Hooray!" she cheered. "We made it on time!" The driver looked at his watch. "The next train doesn't leave until later," he said. "Let's go and see how the workmen are doing." Emily thought this was a wonderful idea, so she puffed happily back to the cottage. She couldn't wait to see the washing line put up in the garden. Soon Emily reached the cottage just as the workmen had finished putting the wire up. Mrs Kyndley was very happy. "Here's your brand new washing line," said the workman. "Now you can put all your laundry back up again." Mrs Kyndley couldn't believe her eyes. "It's wonderful," she smiled. "Thank you, everyone." "It's Emily you should be thanking," smiled Miss Jenny. "She came up with the idea." Mrs Kyndley turned to Emily. "Thank you, Emily," she smiled. "You certainly helped me out of a very awkward situation." "You'd certainly make a mother proud," agreed Miss Jenny. "3 cheers for Emily," cheered Toby. Toby dinged his bell and everyone cheered for Emily. Emily felt very proud of herself. "I made a new friend today," she smiled, "and helped Miss Jenny too." "You were indeed a really useful engine," said her driver, patting her buffer beam. Emily happily agreed.